Welcome back to Moments That Matter. I'm Paul Schatzberger, and I'm here with my co-host extraordinaire, Reverend Scott Williams. Scott, what's your reaction to us recording an episode of MTM after such a long hiatus?
It only feels like home. I woke up this morning, the birds were chirping. The sun wasn't out, but I could tell it was out. We've got clouds, but it's awfully nice here.
It's been a minute since our last episode, but we want you to know that we would only bring MTM out of hibernation for something very important. As many of you know, one of Scott's and my favorite people in the world is Reverend Natasha Dongell, founding and lead pastor of Follow Church. Not only is she a pastor, she's our pastor. Natasha is on a 4-month sabbatical, and one of her primary goals for the sabbatical was to publish a book she's been working on for many years. And she did just that at the end of September. The book is titled When Lynn Died and is her memoir of her grief journey that she made over the last 12 years since the death of her first husband, Lynn Erskine. I got involved with the book in the spring of 2023 when I became Natasha's editor and immersed myself in her story. Remarkable thing to me about the book is not only does Natasha tell a compelling story written in a very engaging style, but because of Natasha's theological and pastoral background, she is able to bring a biblical perspective to the story that allows the story to speak to the reader on an even deeper level. We are delighted to have Natasha with us. Welcome, Natasha.
I am delighted to be here with two of my favorite people. So thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here.
So, your book launched at the end of September, and it is now the middle of November, just to put a timestamp on it. Can you tell us first about the genesis of the book? Where did the idea come from for writing it? What was the writing journey like for you?
Mm, yes. The genesis of the book in some ways started in the initial wave of Lynn's death was very sudden and very, completely unexpected. He was kind of, at the peak of health, 31 years old. And so there was quite a wave of just people reaching out in shock, and I was like, oh Lord, how do I how am I gonna, be where I'm at and respond to all these people? And so I had a blog at the time that I didn't use a lot, but I just kind of thought, I think if I just post something online, it will help, And so I posted something online that was just sort of this is where we are, and just a heartfelt, like, this is to connect with you, and I'm so grateful for your care and compassion. And anyway, just kind of sent this out and into the internet, the sphere of all the things. And that actually became a really wonderful, both kind of community and expression for me, area of expression for the journey of grief. So I ended up blogging. I continued to blog through specifically that first year after Lynn died. And even though, I mean, it wasn't like, it's not thousands and thousands of people, but in my small corner of the world at the time in Atlantic Canada, it was very impactful. And so that was a very powerful experience. That was a very helpful part of the journey for me. And so eventually, somewhere along the lines, I sort of felt this sense of part of my healing journey will be completing a book. And so the writing process is so powerful. We know that it does, it actually does something powerful in your brain. And but also just felt that strong sense of, so it was personal and for myself, while at the same time understanding that I seemed to be articulating things that were unlocking healing experiences in other people's lives. And so I felt that that was very important as well.
All right, so take us back to the beginning then. Tell us a little bit about Lynn and also that terrible day of his passing.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the hard things about publishing this book is it's not, it's still not easy to go back into all of those memories, but I do actually love getting to talk about Lynn. And I was thinking yeah, with this question, just sort of reliving my freshman semester of college and yeah, really fun memories. So I went to Kingswood University for my ministry education outside for my undergrad. And so started as a freshman and Lynn was there. Lynn was American, but we would, lots of Americans would come up to, at least in the Wesleyan circles, would come up and still come up to Kingswood University for their ministry education. And so Lynn was there. He was in his third year, and it's this, small school, under 300. And Lynn was the student council president. He was in this quartet, that did all this stuff. He was the accompanist for the choir as well as a soloist in the choir. There was absolutely no way of missing him. But, when I think back, I just love it because I mean, you were so drawn in to him, but he was so quirky. Like it was such an interesting, so I was not at all immediately like, oh, I'm attracted to this person. It wasn't like that. It was like this like endearing curiosity of like, who is this character, And so he just had this, he was very unique and was very dynamic and very charismatic, very intelligent and very personable and very and unique in those ways and in that mixture, and then but especially unique in how comfortable he was in himself in the midst of all of that. And so you were just sort of drawn in to who is this guy. And so embarrassingly, so yeah, it was kind of like a fast friendship in that sense. So he's third year and I'm this little freshman. But we're in all the music stuff together. We're still, we still cross paths a lot. And embarrassingly, my first real conversation with him was me confessing to him that I had a crush on somebody else, which I'm not sure I've ever told anybody who, because it's even more embarrassing because it was, this popular upperclassman that I had these starry eyes for when he was way out of my league. So anyway, in the beginning, it was just, this is such a sweet, endearing, fascinating guy, and I'm just drawn into him. And then it became very quickly, probably within a couple weeks, that whole dynamic where it was like the whole school conspired against us, like knowing we were made for each other, so we'd be like, there would be these group social things, and then everyone would intentionally pull out at the last minute, and Lynn and I would be left there to get, like things like that happened all the time. And
That's awesome.
so we got really frustrated. It was to the point we got really annoyed, and our whole like middle of that semester, we kept him to go on these drives to like explain and like process. No, we're just friends. No, we're just we worked really hard to be. No, we're just friends. And I think about that too, that I had some pride in that because at the time the school was called Bethany Bible College, but affectionately termed Bethany Bridal College. And I was kind of that girl in the dorm that a lot of these girls would say, like, I'm here for a husband, and I'd be like, I'm here because the Lord has called me into ministry and I am serious about it, I was kind of like, I am not going to date somebody in my first semester. Like, that is not why I'm here. And so I had this kind of pride around it. But by the end of that semester, when he was leaving for Christmas break, I mean, it was an emotional event. I mean, we were head over heels in love with each other. And he had written me. I gave him, just a card that he kept, forever, which I still have. But he gave me a 7-page letter that is depicting how the sunset is reflected in my eyes, like all the all the gold flecks and of the sunset, and comparing them to all these. So I mean, that's Lynn, and he wrote me in a journal every day while he was gone for Christmas, and we had given each other gifts that we opened over the phone. So I mean, when he got back, we were already head over heels in love, but hadn't even, then we became officially dating eventually. And so it was in so many ways, I've described it that it was like two puzzle pieces that just fit together. And it was so easy that there was no effort involved in being together. And yeah, just, it was so right and so natural. And we just became Lynn and Natasha. We were like inseparable from that point on. And so yes, fast forward about, yeah, let's see. So 9 years later. So we were, well, no, we were together for 12 years, including dating. We were almost married for 9 years. And we have our 2 baby girls, and we're in ministry in actually Truro, Nova Scotia, at a Baptist church, which was a very interesting, random way that felt like the Lord put us there. But was a beautiful church, and yeah, he is just going out for a run, and we had just come off of a couple of weeks of summer vacation at the end of August, and so we were kind of just arrived and back, like, okay, now we got to get in the mode for fall. And those 2 weeks were really special and important for us. We really needed that time together. And so some weird things. So it was Sunday, and Sunday morning, he led worship. He's a worship pastor at this church. And some weird things were happening a couple times throughout the afternoon, as we're just like, we're parenting the littles. We're in the stage of the little kids. And he would have this almost like a shiver go through his body a couple of times that were just like, you just stop and look. Like, it was just kind of odd. And anyway, then he was planning to go for his run. He was preparing for a marathon, which he'd done, and he had gotten into running quite a bit, but was very missionally minded. And so he had support from some different organizations, and was running for a project in Rwanda. And anyway, he was going out for just one of his training runs, and had just encouraged him to wait and meet up with his running partner Andrew after we'd been away on vacation. So why don't you wait and run with Andrew later? And so he did that. And so I'm with the babies and kind of just watching him run, and he runs out, and he would run to Andrew's house, meet him there, and then they would do this big run together, run back to Andrew's house, and then usually he'd go in for a glass of water, and they'd laugh and talk for way too long, and then he'd run himself home. And so they did that, and Sarah, at somewhere around 10 p.m., Andrew's wife Sarah calls and has this it's just a weird conversation, where you just know this is like not a normal thing happening. And just says, is Lynn on any medications? And, and it's like, why are you asking? No. And she just says, the paramedics are pounding on his chest, and do you want me to come? But so she was kind of completely freaked out, but was kind of like overcompensating with her tone, so she was like overly calm in her tone, but saying these like really, really strange things. And so my brain was like, I'm struggling to process what's happening. But anyway, she came. So I had about 10 minutes where I'm waiting for her to come. So I'm getting ready to go to the hospital, and I can't really process what's going on, but I'm praying. And I called my mom and said, something's up, will you pray? And anyway, she gets there, and she's kind of a mess. And so the kids are asleep, but she's there to be with them at the house, so I can go and yeah, I get to the hospital, and my pastor was there, and just start walking through this experience of first just being kind of intercepted and led into this little room. I have such a distaste for hospitals. So I think I did before this experience, but even more so now. But then in this little room, the doctor comes in, and she was clearly emotional, about the situation, and just said he stopped breathing, his heart stopped, he died, and then went in to see the body and went from there.
You have self-described yourself to me as a highly sensitive person, or HSP. Can you give us some insight into what this kind of loss is like for an HSP?
Yeah, I think that question is so interesting. And I'm not sure if I have a great answer for it, because it's hard to maybe separate, what specifically would just be related to HSP. But I think there's just a sense in which, maybe sometimes even things that would be very deeply and strongly felt by anybody, might be more deeply and it's just strongly felt. And so there's a sense in which, there's just and also not just grief and sadness, or some of the things we think about, but the whole complicated mixture, and the layers and the nuanced, like even relational layers. And so there's maybe a sense of being, so sometimes an HSP, someone who might be highly sensitive, maybe, and so again, I can't really say this as, oh, every HSP would have this experience, but maybe we're picking up on more of the nuances underneath in a way that accentuates and complicates the grief. Whereas for some, maybe it can be a little bit more streamlined, or, and so I see it as a gift. I believe it's a gift to be able to discern even really nuanced things that I think that's a really powerful gift, but is a lot for an HSP, to take in and process all of those things. And that can be hard for people looking in to understand. And so, there's a lot of grace needed, a lot of space needed to process all of I call it data, all the data that I'm taking in. If it doesn't get filed somewhere, it's like if you picture an office where somebody just like threw a whole stack of papers all around, it's like, that's the brain. If there's no, so without the space to really process and gain understanding of, what are these things that I'm feeling and sensing and discerning, it can feel like I really can't function very well, because it's a little chaotic inside. And so it takes a little bit more effort maybe, and to process even more of the experience with all of the nuances involved.
Right. So I think this is related to that. So besides being an HSP, there you are. You're 28 years old. You're suddenly a widow, and your two kids are ages 4 and 2. So you describe in the book the difficult and kind of awkward conversations you had with friends and family in that first year after Lynn's death. Can you describe what you felt you needed during that time versus what you actually experienced?
So first of all, I'll say I experienced so much love, so I'm just so thankful for my family, the church family, my friends. I was so, so, so loved. So I'm so grateful for that. And I'm never wanting anyone to hear anything different than that. So at the same time, part of being this, HSP or, whatever it is, I felt very aware of people's discomfort with grief, so at the same time, so there's so much love, but at the same time, it's so complicated. Who can, how people interact with you, what you can say, what you can't. There's so much discomfort around the whole experience. And, so it was like really early. I want to say within the first month, but I'm not great at isolating the right timeline of some of these things. But I remember, having a conversation with a pastor, and he's checking in on me, and I make this, kind of quick statement of like, well, I mean, I feel depressed, and just really quickly jump to, well, I hope you're taking medication for that, and moved on. And so things like that, where you're like, no, actually it's really important that I feel this part of my grief journey. Like, this is a very necessary, so it was just a lot of that, and a lot of just people not understanding how, but including me, I don't know how to do this. So that, it's this whole awkwardness altogether. It's not like it's just them and I know the right thing to do. I still don't know the right thing to do sometimes, but that whole, even that thought process is evidence of our wrong thinking about it. There is no right thing to do. There's no right thing to say, wrong thing to say, but there's so much energy around, I don't know how to do this. Like, am I going to say the right thing? And just awkwardness around how do you deal with pain? How do you face it? How do you sit in it? How do you sit in these questions that have no answers? Like, how do you sit in tragedy and just be there and have an open heart, but you don't, like, there's no way to fix it. There's absolutely no way to fix what happened. So people are very uncomfortable in those situations. And I can feel that in myself still sometimes if I'm sitting with someone in their pain and I don't know the right things to say, because we're so performance minded that we're always questioning, am I doing the right thing? Am I saying the right thing? Am I doing a good job? But none of those things are actually what's relevant. That's us being Job's friends, and not having the understanding that the Lord had with Job, and what it is like to be in that place and be just in presence and allow God to do these powerful things that he does in those dark places.
Yeah, and I will say for everybody listening who hasn't read the book, this is something that comes across very powerfully. And I mean, in other words, like, we're with you, Natasha, in the mess, and you describe it, as well as can be described, in that kind of experience, to really draw the reader in. And it's amazing. I do want to ask about some of the powerful visions and dreams you were given during your grief process, but I want to make sure our listeners understand and appreciate that these are not discrete events that are kind of self-contained, like here's the story in one chapter and here's the story in another chapter. These things bleed over, and I think that the way Natasha writes is very masterful about this, because, and one of the things I really enjoyed about editing her book, she finds a way to kind of interweave those circumstances and revelations so that they show up, initially, and then they show up again, and then they show up again. And it gives us a much better sense of how complex the grief process is. So let me ask about one of the dreams, and this is actually when Lynn was still alive, which was surprising to me when I first read it. And it's kind of, if anybody out there listening knows the book My Heart Cries Home, this is kind of along those lines of having a vision of your life as a house. So in this dream, Natasha, you went from room to room with Jesus until you got to this closet, which was closed. And when the closet door was open, you saw something both unexpected and terrifying. And so can you tell us, first of all, what you saw, and then what that revelation came to mean to you over time?
Yeah. 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 It was so important. This was such an important gift that the Lord gave me, and happened, that summer before Lynn died. So within a couple months. And so I remember, I was telling Lynn about it, and just, I I don't quite know yet what it means. And, then revisiting it later. But it was, yeah, like if, my soul is this little house and, the Lord's in my house. And so it's like he's coming in and we're walking around and it's so quaint and tidy, just this like lovely space. And it's like in the dream, I'm like, look at this lovely space, that we have together. And, aren't you proud of how, beautiful it is? And then, but the Lord he's silent the whole time. But that's one of these amazing things about his presence. There's so much in his presence without him even needing to say anything. And so he's just so kind and so gentle and just walking with me through this little house. And yeah, we come to this door and it's like, I've never seen this door before. I had no idea this door was there in my house. Like, what is this door? And so we open it. And I always think of the Truman Show, which is this old Jim Carrey movie where when he's like out on the water and all of a sudden there's this door, and anyway, it's like door and then like stormy ocean for as far as you can see is like, what the dream looks like. And so, there's no step, it's just like the threshold and then stormy wave, wind, darkness, sea. And so I'm looking at it and I look at Jesus and I'm like, what is that? Like, what is this? And again, he doesn't say anything. He's just so present and he's kind and he's all knowing. And so that was the end of that, initial dream. And then later, that comes back to me a couple times, after Lynn died in some really important ways. So at first I was just like, oh, well, now I know, what that was. But then it was like, no, it's not just grief though. This was there before. And it's actually grief in a sense was actually the gift of it like created this like tsunami from that wave that sort of completely crushed the rest of my house. So it's really more representative of I actually had so much repressed trauma, that I carried around as completely separate from, my neat and tidy little house. And I was carrying around this massive amount of repressed trauma. And in that, what Jerry Sitzer calls the catastrophic loss, it kind of is like that tsunami. It's like this explosion. It kind of tears everything down, but in a way that actually exposes what is actually in your soul. And so that's where I feel actually so protective about the grief journey for people, because I'm like, I would never want to keep living in my neat and tidy little house and that massive amount of repressed pain and trauma just like sitting there in my soul. That's not what the Lord wants for me. That's not the life that is available to me in Christ. And so the gift of our painful experiences is this sort of opening up what is actually in our soul so the Lord can actually heal it, because he actually heals and transforms us instead of us pretending that we now just behave better, is sometimes the gospel that we believe. But the Lord's like, no, I actually want to heal you. And so at some point, yeah, a little bit into my grief journey, it was as I was reflecting on that dream and I kind of relived that same dream vision, and where the Lord, we open the door, we're looking at the waters, but then all of a sudden Jesus is out there on the water, kind of this walking on water Peter moment. And he didn't say anything, but it was just this sense of like, you're calling me, this is where you want me to go. Like, you want me to go into all this mess. You want me to go into all this pain. And so through that dream, he really communicated to me a strong, confident sense of your healing through this process is this way. is through all of this mess and pain, but I am so here with you in it. Like I'm right here. And but we're gonna your new life is on the other side of all of this pain. So I termed it the sea of open wounds, and knew it was going to be a really long journey of, okay, so I'm not just grieving the loss of Lynn. I actually have massive amounts of stuff that need to be healed, that still today I'm still, that still need to be healed. And so, but that the Lord, he's with me in it, and I've learned how to not repress everything, but know that I can actually enter those places of pain with him. So that was a very powerful, sort of pivotal part of how the Lord led me on that journey.
Yeah, and that's a very impressive to me vision, dream, picture. It's something that I think we can all relate to, actually. You know, that these things that we ignore, which is like my heart cries home, but at the same time, how crazy it is. It's not just this kind of unkempt closet that we just sweep out or something like that. It's just wild. So, okay. So another of the pictures that you give us, one of the chapters of the book is called Make Space, which includes a picture that you had from the book of Job, something you call the blanket of sorrows. And can you tell us what that's a reference to? And also, what does it mean to make space? Like, where did that idea come from?
As many people do, it is hard to, not look at Job when you're in some kind of a season of suffering, and there is so much to learn there. And so I was studying and just sort of just really inviting the Lord, to teach me. And so one of the things that felt so powerful, that I was so intrigued by with Job, is the way, it's his boldness before the Lord, but the way that the Lord is constantly validating that his words are blameless. And so you've got these friends speaking all this religious lingo, and you've got this like raw pain, suffering Job, and the Lord is validating over and over again. But Job is the one who's been blameless, and his words are blameless before me. And so, maybe you'll be okay if I let him pray for you. It's like at the end. And so it just developed for me. I sat in that, for a long time, and it just developed for me, because it's hard to have permission. First of all, it's hard to have permission to grieve when it's very countercultural on many levels. In some ways, just the discomfort of they're more comfortable with positivity in most, Western cultures, I guess, in the Western world. It feels, and then they're also really afraid of not being able to fix something. And so if you're going to sit in the middle of something that's like not fit, like there's a need to rush and fix it. And it's very uncomfortable to think that we can't rush and fix something. And so there's all these like cultural nuances that make the griever feel like they have no permission to really journey deeply with the Lord, because it's so uncomfortable for everyone around them, let alone themselves, also for themselves. And then just productivity, like just life, we have to also pay bills. We have to, there's so many pressures that make it very difficult to have any amount of, time or space to be able to sit and journey deeply with the Lord for a deeper healing and transformation. When I think that, the Lord so wants that. And these moments I feel like this is not a good word, but they're so powerfully leveraged for our transformation. These suffering experiences they're not to be, you don't just close the door on the sea of open wounds. Like, you go there, like keep the door open and go there with the Lord. And that takes so much time. It takes energy. But what was so what was so hard, so there's just that, like, the logistical side of actually like having time, making time, finding space where you're not being told, receiving some message where you've got to, hurry up and move on. And so you can really permission yourself to enter in, but then also really learning the power of presence, and that requires honesty, and how the Lord. So what is that religious voice versus my honesty that I bring to the Lord is actually this incredible relational gift. And so what Job did is he did not leave relationship with the Lord through that experience. He refused to. So the blanket of sorrows for me became this. I started to see Job's stubbornness in his refusal to get up off the ground. Like, he's still sitting there. He is sitting on the ground, facing the Lord, bringing him his raw honesty and persevering in that place. And that is a massive, that's faith. Like, that takes an incredible, without faith, it is impossible to please God, because we have to first believe that he exists and that he's a rewarder of those who earnestly seek him. So, like, Job knows there is a God on the other side of this conversation, and he's not breaking relationship with him. And the friends really want him to, his wife really wants him to. So this blanket of sorrows for me became this like symbol. I just picture, it comes from nowhere, but my imagination is that he's on a blanket, like what, like you do at a picnic blanket or something. He's just like out there sitting on this blanket. But for me, it's like I'm in my space where you're not allowed to tell me that I don't have permission to be raw. Like, when I'm on this blanket, this is what's happening, is I am bringing my raw honesty to the Lord, and I'm keeping relationship with him, and I'm persevering in that place, and I'm not getting off. I am not getting off this blanket until he meets me here and he speaks with me. And that is my right as a child of God. And he actually honors it, and he loves it, and he rewards it. And so it really became a stubborn, like, I needed to be stubborn about that, because no one else is telling you that. No one else is giving you the message. You know what you should do today? You should just sit on your blanket of sorrows and feel all your feelings, and wait until the Lord meets with you. Like, that's not usually what someone wakes up and thinks to say to you. They're much more interested in other things. So you have to develop a really strong stubbornness around, no, I'm sticking to this journey, and I'm going all the way, and I'm going until, the Lord really does heal and transform me.
So it's kind of the story of like Jacob wrestling with the angel, and I won't let you go until you bless me. That's so awesome, because, and I think you actually make this point in the book, that so many people in grief give up too soon, and so wind up sort of stuck, in that. So the turning point in the book comes as a result of yet another revelation about your soul being caught between sunset and sunrise, something that was inspired by another dream, this time by Jerry Sitzer in his book, Grace Disguised. So in his dream, Jerry is in his grief, and he's running after the setting sun, which he realizes after a while is futile. Later, his sister tells him the quickest way for anyone to reach the sun in the light of day is not to run west, chasing after the setting sun, but to head east, plunging into the darkness until one comes to the sunrise. So can you talk to our listeners about this kind of in-between time in grief, and how you finally came to the place of plunging east?
Yeah. That was such a powerful metaphor for me, and helped me, very similar. It's sort of partnered with the story we already talked about with the Sea of Open Wounds, and that sense of, I'm going into the darkness, and that's where, that's the direction that I'm heading. So I can't chase the setting sun, chase, happy feelings, and just like keep repressing everything, like, that's not That's not going to work. There's no, the sun has gone down. Like there's no life over there, but there is life and there is a sunrise, but it's this like, oh my, but I've got to journey through the dark night of the soul, to see that, to be at that sunrise. And so, yeah, I think every believer at least once walks through the dark night of the soul, that St. John of the Cross termed it for us, gave it a name for us that we use. And I think he says some very important and profound things that, sometimes even if we just talk about Christianity in the United States, there's a sense in which we sometimes, we're struggling a little bit with discipleship and almost a sense of we've got maybe some immaturity as Christians. We felt that a little bit through COVID, where, a lot of our people, it's like when they're on their own, maybe they don't quite know how to actually follow the Lord in these different ways. There's a little bit of a sense of, okay, we might need to figure out some things about how to raise and disciple mature believers who are very much, if COVID happens and we're cut out, we know that they're capable of, they know how to read the word, they know how to, all these things that make a mature believer. And I believe the dark night of the soul is actually such a necessary part of our maturity process, but that culturally we don't make space for. And so I think even in the church, we don't know how to make space for, or even help kind of teach on, like, normalize, like, this is a normal experience. Every character in the Bible experienced these seasons of numbness, and so it feels like we all have these experiences spiritually where we feel either rejected, we feel like we're failing. It's like we're striving, but we're failing. We can no longer feel, we don't feel the joy in our faith and our relationship with the Lord and our time in God's word. All of those things are, what we would call weaning, and what David talks about, the weaning, and how there's this beautiful contentment on the other side of being weaned off of how the Lord first meets us as infants, as spiritual infants. He nurtures us like a mother with her child at the womb, but then he's actually trying to grow you to become a mature adult in the Lord who's working alongside. Like, he gives us jobs, he trusts us to have dominion and leadership in the world, like really beautiful and powerful things that he wants us to be partnering with him in. And so I do feel like this dark night of the soul experience is necessary for every believer. And I think grief is just one of the ways that we often enter one of those seasons. And so, but knowing that you can actually embrace that season, and that you don't have to run from it. You don't have to feel ashamed, like something's wrong with you. You don't have to feel like you've been rejected. You don't have to feel like you've failed, but you can actually know God trusts and believes in me and is empowering me and growing me to maturity because he wants me partnering with him. That's powerful, and a message that I feel like, we need to share so much more than we do, so that believers have a new framework for those experiences. So for me, it was, very much, I have to embrace this dark night of the soul and let God do the stuff. He's killing me. He's literally killing things in me, and some of the parts were like, actually, I had to learn a kind of passivity I'd never heard about before, but St. John of the Cross writes about it in The Dark Night of the Soul, where sometimes it's like you're on the operating table and you're put out, like you stop striving. He's stopping your striving. And he's doing things that you can't even see or understand, but you let him. You're just in this like state of yieldedness and surrender, and God's able to move and do things in these powerful ways because of that. So moving through this dark night of the soul, I think is so critical. but requires certain skills and like some understanding that I think sometimes people are lacking. And so that's where, I grieve feeling like some people leave the faith thinking, they're just disillusioned, think that the Lord just wasn't there, and they walk away. But it's like, what if the Lord trusts and believes in you so much that he's inviting you into this maturing experience that's really important and powerful?
You had mentioned just very briefly earlier about kind of Western mindset. Maybe we could get into that just a little bit because you do talk about this a fair amount in the book. You write about the deception of independence in our Western culture, the unwillingness to talk about death, even recognize death, and the resulting shame for the individual caught in grief's grip. Can you kind of expound on those ideas just a little bit for our listeners in terms of like your own experience?
Yeah. Yeah. I think firstly, with anything like that, I I just want, yeah, there's no sense of judgment in that, in terms of, I think it's very necessary that we evaluate our culture because as Christ followers, we're meant to be, we want to live in a kingdom culture. And sometimes we have to evaluate, the culture that we're in and ways that they're different, you know. So I think that, yeah, part of the Western culture and things that you know, smarter people than me know so much more about, but that some things potentially, took shape in the age of enlightenment and really, the age of reason, really prioritizing the intellect, which some, if my understanding is correct, some of that is this reaction to some really crazy mysticism. I love the beautiful, like the mystics in the faith, like I love that. But then you've got the crazy side of what was happening during that time with superstition and things that were really unhealthy and wrong. So maybe this really strong reaction to some of that became this really, prioritizing the intellect. But in all of that, there's a sense in which we, in prioritizing the intellect and creating this culture around reason, and then also around productivity and efficiency and management and really money, if I can be honest, a lot of actual money and wealth, there's a very strong neglect of the whole human being. So I feel like we've been in the that's been playing out for, however many years, however many decades, this sense of like there's this breakdown of the soul, that it can't thrive in that situation. And so a lot of money was made, a lot of great advancements have happened, and technology and all these things are amazing, but then also this kind of breakdown of the soul in a lot of different ways, and then breakdown of relationships, breakdown of the family. So again, I don't say any of that with judgment, but just this like observant, recognizing our culture. So I think that our culture naturally still, yeah, is influenced by those things, and has a strong priority on productivity and on wealth as well, and on, I don't know that I would say the intellect or reason, and I think it's very different when we look at Gen Z and our emerging generations, but we still have this overlap, of sort of past culture and maybe a new one that's being developed, still being formed. So yeah, in all of that, I think the griever, it doesn't have a lot of space and outlet for really healthy understanding of death, understanding of the soul. What are the practices? Like, what are our cultural practices around loss? Like, we do have funerals, but that's it, really, whereas we have other cultures around the world that have these rich, robust, beautiful ways that they continue to honor those that they lost. And then inside, so how that's influenced the church really fascinates me, because we don't believe the same thing about death. We believe in everlasting life, and so that's not always doesn't always feel reflected in how we're approaching death and how we're approaching loss and grief. So it feels like there's just a lot of kind of a ways that some different cultural understandings play into it's a very misunderstood experience, and there are very little outlets or expressions and practices that really empower grief to be a really beautiful, powerful thing. So I was reading recently just even about Shiva, but I don't know if I'm saying that right now. Yeah. And just, yeah, being reminded of even in the Jewish culture. So sometimes I think, even in the church, looking at verses like Paul saying, well, we don't grieve as those who have no hope. So sometimes people from our Western cultural mindset, we're saying that, and we're really trying to use that scripture to say, so don't grieve. It's wrong for you to grieve because you're supposed to rejoice always in the Lord, is kind of a very common message, when actually, he's saying that from a completely different worldview that has grief practices so beautifully interwoven into how they live, that he's coming from a very different place when he makes that statement. And so we can project this Western mindset onto some of those verses in a really damaging way. Whereas I don't think the Lord never does that. And even the Jewish culture has these gorgeous practices for how they come alongside each other in grief, and just how they know how to just sit and be present with each other and not rush, and just they can sit in ashes, and just they can externally express their grief in a culturally appropriate way. And I don't think we have any Western practices where you're allowed to do that.
I just finished reading a book called Dawn of Sunday, and it's the Trinitarian role of, in the grief process, basically, of addressing trauma. And they talk about, first of all, of course, they talk about, how little the church knows about this, of addressing people in trauma, but that in one attempt to, come alongside, unfortunately, what happens is that people who have not really experienced, trauma, or certainly not in the same way, try to do kind of a top down, like calling everybody together, and we're going to form a group, and we're going to, support each other. And their point is, hey, let the griever who's farther down the line, let them do that, because they can speak to the experience, and the typical, pastor, the typical leader in the church may have absolutely no connection, to that. So, yeah, I think there is maybe a dawning of realization in the church of the complicated nature of this, and that, our culture has just absolutely minimized the effects of death. And yeah, anyway. Okay, so what about relationships over the years of grief? There is a chapter, Learn to Connect, and you talk about 3 kinds of relationships, all of which were critical to supporting you through that time and over years. Can you describe just a little bit about those relationships, and like what differentiates them from each other, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I think that was, for me, I think one of the challenging dynamics that was maybe unexpected, how challenging that dynamic would be in that loss experience, was just how it's affecting everybody else. And then everybody, like, I'm so blessed that, I had so many people who wanted to help me, but that was also overwhelming, at different times. It was like, I don't know how to manage all of this. And everyone wants answers from me. Everyone wants, well, what do we do? How can we help? What do you need? But, I was like, now I don't know. And so it was this really interesting. And then sometimes, a lot of people come to you in grief with their own grief. And so then sometimes it's this dynamic of, some people would come to me and just be like, we are in this together, but I'm going like, no, we're not in this together. I'm bless you. And but like, it's not like that. I can't just link arms with you and journey this with you in your grief right now. I don't know. It's just, it was like, what are these dynamics? So for me and just how I'm wired, I was really trying to process what are all these dynamics, that are at play. And it helped me a lot when I began to frame, these kind of three different kinds of relationship and also like help during that time. And so the one of them being this wave of first responders who are just so, people who just want to help meet your logistical needs. And it's so good if you can have a list of logistical needs or have somebody else create a list of logistical, like babysitting, like, just come and do my dishes, like just really basic logistical needs that you can be like, if you're serious, here's my list, please, like, yes, meet some of these logistical needs. Like, that's so helpful because for the griever, they can't make space and actually go through their grief journey if they have no help in all of the caring for their family or, whatever their situation is, their work, all the things that you have to do. So having people who can just come and help meet those practical needs is really, really important and was so amazing, like such a gift to me. But that's a different need from then, there would be this sense of like, okay, closer family and friends they're more like, okay, let's go for a walk and I'll just listen, and some conversation. I remember I had a neighbor who we weren't even super close before this happened. Like we were we were definitely friends but she would just pick me up and she had an older daughter and her daughter would stay and babysit and she'd just take me to a movie. So it was like, you just brain break, just like, get you out, just do something, and that was actually amazing for me. It was like, I don't have to entertain you. I don't have to, like, I don't even have to be social. I can just sit here and watch a movie and have a break. Like, that was amazing. So that wasn't necessarily one of my practical needs. And it wasn't necessarily like you are right up close in the deep emotions of my journey, but it was this like kind of middle ground of people that were alongside and friends and I had relationship with and were so helpful. But then I talk about the few and how for me it was really, and I feel like, I'm introverted. So this could look so different for an extrovert, than it looks for an introvert. So as an introvert, so I don't know exactly what the experience would look like and if this is completely different or still similar with someone who's really extroverted. But it seems to me that there's really only a few, even, no matter who you are, that are these like specific people that can sit with you in your deepest places of pain and have no judgment, no expectations on you, just complete love and freedom and presence. And those people, so only a very few can do that. And they can't, some of them can't do it for very long. So that was the other thing is like my few would change. Everyone except for my friend Liz Brewer, when she read my book, she was like, I really, she was, it all came back and she was just like, I really knew everything. So she was, she really was there the whole time. That's rare that somebody can do that, I think. And so she was a special gift in that way. But there's so many people who came in at different times to play that role for me. But without anybody, oh, that's really hard. If you don't have anyone you feel like you can really just like honestly, it's like your blanket of sorrows, but you're able to actually share it with a human, not just the Lord, but in human form, receive that presence and comfort and be able to say the things that you culturally can't say, be angry, the things that you just would get maybe shamed for or judged by in other contexts. Yeah, you've got to have one or two that are alongside in that way.
That's amazing. And I'm so glad that those kinds of people were there for you. And as long as we're on threes, So another powerful idea in the book is the three deaths that are experienced. And I think, you know, I'm aware of, people talking about the second death, and that kind of thing, but that's not what you mean at all. This is not, I don't know, this has nothing particularly to do with eternity. It's those deaths that are experienced by someone who has lost a loved one. So can you tell us about that just a little bit?
I think that is a fascinating thing about grief, is that in some ways the deaths don't end, and so you maybe kind of get to an, but there's still, it's not, I don't experience it as a death, but there's still the sense of, when my oldest daughter is up there killing it in percussion, and she's just so exactly Lynn. I mean, and just like, just the ways that it's like, oh, he's not here. I mean, I do feel, a lot of times I'll talk to him. I'm still, weird that way, where I'm like, I feel like he could see her and whatever. So, but I feel, yeah, just that sense of like, you're just aware, so through that grief process, there's so many deaths that keep happening. And that's where we call that multiple losses and compound grief. And, all these, there's all these different ways that plays out. But it also became so real, this idea of the second death that I first read about in a book called A Severe Mercy, where C.S. Lewis is writing these letters to a dear friend who's processing the loss of his wife to cancer, and trying to process God and faith, and so he kind of, that was where I first learned this idea around, after that first death and you're experiencing all these losses and all this stuff, like, you're really still in a bubble. There's just a sense in which you still have this bubble of grace around you, or this, your brain does this thing with like shock and denial, and it protects you from the complete sense of that loss, like the full finality of that death. And so that idea of the second death felt very real after the first anniversary of Lynn's death for me, when it was like, I had no idea. I mean, it's just insane. I had no idea that it was like I was telling myself, if I just get through this first year. I think that's just what I heard. I over and over again heard, if you just get through that first year, all those first holidays, like that's what I would hear all the time. And so it's like, I'm telling myself, if I get through, like, there's some magic thing that happens, at the end of that first year, like what? And so, but for that for there to be nothing, like Lynn is still dead. Like I'm at the end, it hit me in an entirely new and different way. And it was devastating to me. Like then that was the first time it was like, the rest of my life, like this is the rest of my life. And it sunk all the way deep into my bones, that realization. And so that was a whole different like grief experience, and was very raw. And it's like I no longer had that bubble, the bubble has been removed. And so I'm feeling it differently. And then I write about, this, then in that process really, really brings me to the point of my own death. And so that third death being, now I really have to die. Who I was has to die. So it's not just Lynn, but Lynn and Natasha, and who Natasha was as Lynn and Natasha. Like, there's a whole different, now I'm having to let myself die in a way that I hadn't had to before, as I was still in all the things, and I'm still Lynn's widow, and whatever. And so I came to this point after the second death of thinking, okay, this is now the third death is now my death, and really having to face the facts that I don't exist my old life does not exist. None of that is alive anymore. And I have to actually chart a completely new course and understand a whole new me and a whole new life. And so, yeah, that was sort of the progression that I went on.
So is it fair to say that that third death is kind of what ultimately redeems the first two?
I think the third death took a really long time.
Mm,
So, yeah, I don't think it ever felt like I had this moment of redemption. It was just plodding forward. And until I guess I would more go to the picture of the stump in a garden. That was a blog post. And oh man, now I can't remember if that comes from Jerry's book or a different place, but sorry. But this idea of in loss, you've got this great big beautiful tree in your backyard that represents that relationship or that thing, and then it's like, cut off at the stump, and then you just all you see is this stump, and eventually you kind of move away from the stump, and maybe you plant a few things over here, and eventually over time you can kind of stand up and look around and be like, oh wow, there's these beautiful flowers that have come up over here, and you start to see evidence of kind of a new life and more, but that stump is there. It's never going to go away, but it can become this kind of beautiful part of the landscape of something that's more full and beautiful later on. So I feel like that's just a picture that connects a little bit better with that journey.
I appreciate that. So, final chapter. Final chapter is coming home. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the sometimes kind of open-ended quality of grief, that happily ever after may not necessarily have meaning for the griever.
Yeah, that was a hard one for me too. Yeah, that was a fun process with Paul writing the last. We're
I'm
like,
glad you think that
we
was
don't
fun.
know what we don't know if this is going to come together. What is this last chapter going to say? But I think that was really hard for me to work through. There was this immediate sense of we want a Hollywood ending to the story, and that remarriage is the Hollywood ending to this story. And I just felt like that did not honor the Lord, and it wasn't honest, but not in a way that I wanted to dishonor and not celebrate the gift, of my husband and my family and how amazing that is. But so I really, yeah, I for a while I was very scared to even approach writing that last chapter. And so I think that I might just revisit, that garden stump backyard image. And I just think it's too oversimplified to think like this is where, yeah, right in that chapter, it's like, oh, you lost a husband and now you gained a husband, fixed, like done, like it's this mathematical equation or something, and it's like, that's not true. And I, as a writer, Paul, you can probably attest to this, and I'm blanking on the quote right now, but just, yeah, whether it's Ernest Hemingway or, who says this, but something, just a writer tells the truth. Like a writer has to tell the truth. And I really feel that deeply in writing that, yeah, I just felt like I can't give the happy ending that people want. And so I really wrestled with it, but I have so much joy in my new life and the gifts and the blessings that God has given me. But it's just more beautiful than that. It's not, I still love Lynn. Like I weep. I still weep sometimes. I still miss him. I still wish I could talk to him about our daughters, in ways that they're like him. I still love his family, and it's really hard to figure out how to have time for, three families, and there's grief all the time that's ongoing in ways that, we're not there with his family as much as we want to be and they want us to be. And there's just an ongoing reality that's complex, but it's still gorgeous. It's still beautiful. It's just the oversimplification does not seem to honor the actual truth that it's just it our life is going to be messy and complicated, and the hope isn't remarriage. The hope is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Hope is that my heart is home in Christ, and therefore I move through the rest of this life where I'm going to experience ongoing sorrows. Like, I'm going to continue to have pain. Like, those things are going to continue as I'm alive on this earth. And so, like, remarriage is not the thing that fixes that, but Jesus is the thing that fixes that, as I can find my home in him and learn how to be so secure in his love and my attachment to him that I can just keep walking and moving through all these different things that happen in life, but going from glory to glory, and just looking forward to seeing his face.
I would imagine it's a little bit different for someone who has lost a spouse who does not already have children. But I think for you, there is this ongoing thing, because just like you were talking about, you know, your daughter playing percussion and, oh, he'd love that. But at the same time, almost like looking into their faces and seeing him, that's it. It's just this constant reminder, after a lot of grief and a lot of loss, there is then this valuing of the person, as we've talked about, that, yeah, it hurts, and yeah, you wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but you're just so grateful for the person, and like me with my dad, it's this month, it's 31 years, and it might as well be last week, that he passed away. He was just one of my best friends. And so, but to celebrate that, not like, oh, there's this huge hole in my heart, it'll never get, filled up again or something like that. Yeah, that to me is that's a gift from God. That redemption, that view is a gift from God, because it doesn't have to be like that. And I know Scott feels, like that about his dad. And yeah. So speaking of Scott, he's been awfully silent.
I do have a question for the both of you that's not so much about the content of the book, but maybe the process. And the content was phenomenal and just a beautiful summary, Natasha, that you provided even now. I'm curious, though, we have Dr. Paul Schatzberger, author extraordinaire, and who has written a number of books. And Natasha, this is your first book of many that is to come. And so I'm curious how it was this is a question for both of you, how it was for the both of you writing together and working through this process together and creating this amazing masterpiece that we have to read.
Well, I will just say that it was a privilege of my life for Natasha to give me that original manuscript, because, I thought I knew about her. I thought I knew about, what had happened and everything. And I had no idea, zero. And so not only was I able to, think in terms of a book, okay, fine, but I was just constantly thinking in terms of her life, and how gracious God, was for, only because he is a gracious God. It's just, he doesn't owe us anything, to be able to go through that kind of journey. I will say that Natasha had a lot of this written by the time I came along. I was sort of more of a voice of organization. And, maybe this here, whatever. But as she has already alluded, that last chapter, that was more like, we're just gonna wrestle this one out, and and for those who read the book, I really want you to value that last chapter, because that took months, and I was not exactly convinced that it was going to happen. There was just a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff, and yet somehow, it emerged, and I think the book is stronger because of it. So it's just been a real privilege for me, and a joy, to work with Natasha in that way.
Well, from my perspective, I think I had gone as far as I could go by myself without, and I had some other people kind of coach a little bit and like keep me accountable, but not speak into my writing in a way that I really needed, because with this particular book and content, I couldn't separate myself from it the way you have to be able to edit and cut. And I never got to the point, after years of waiting and trying to go back to it and rewrite it, and I could never get to the point where I could go into it and not just be reliving it. And so I couldn't see clearly what is just me, what is just, this is my processing versus what is for somebody else, what. And so what Paul did was he brought those eyes and that perspective in such an honoring way. So he could say, well, okay, over here, you switched into your pastor voice. So he was like, we are cutting that out. There will not be any of that in this. It's like, okay, perfect. Like, that's what I need right now. Like, I can't see that clearly. And so he brought the eyes, but that had also the insight, but in this like honoring way where he actually could get my story. Like, he could get the book. He got my voice, and so he had that ability to come alongside, but then speak into, okay, you need more of it. Because the other thing, Paul, is there was no chapter 3. Oh gosh.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Of my soul. He was like, you have to write about your childhood. You have to give people. So there were things that were like, I was like, no. And that was really hard. That was very hard for I'm writing about my parents, sharing very vulnerable things about my parents, like the fact that they allowed me to do that. So but it was very hard for me to have clarity by myself and know how to make those decisions, because I'm too tied to the story. And so, but also it's Paul's gift to be able to do that. So I tell him, I would not have made it, Paul, without you. You were a very critical, like, I could not have done this without Paul. So it was very important to me to have someone that was never judging. So I never felt like he's judging my story or my creativity. Like, I felt very honored in my story, while him being able to say, but here's the difference. This needs to go. This is what we need more of. And that was amazing.
And I'll also throw in there about chapter 3. Sometimes editors and authors have to work stuff out between them. And I won't go into any detail about that, but that there for sure can be misunderstandings and or not enough understanding. How about that? On one or the other part. And especially for an editor, because the easiest thing in the world is just to look at it objectively and just say, we don't need this, or something like that. But it's just never that easy, and especially for an author, it's never that easy. This is the second time actually that I've helped somebody write their story. And one of my favorite things, not to go on and on, is the cutting room floor. That's one of my favorite things. Like, I will always know something that the general readership does not know. It's so cool, and it's like this insight, that. And I was just glad, that I was there for the story. I was glad that, even if it didn't make it into the book, I was glad to know that that happened, and, that it was important, and that sort of thing. So anyway, that's just a little editor's perspective there.
Beautifully said. It reflected wonderfully in the book. It was phenomenal. I can't wait. If you are listening to this and you have not read it, before the sun sets on this day, get the book, read it. I read it in one setting. Actually, I read the first 50% of it, and I said, I got to pull myself out of this, and I got to refresh. I took like 30 minutes. I went back into it. It was just, you mentioned, Natasha, the end of the journey, and you invited us along that journey and invited us in a way to continue our own experiences of loss that we all have in different ways. Paul, you were so right. I thought so much of my own father as I was reading through this book, and of the tragedy that surrounded that season, and how, as the years have passed, I read myself into some of these situations that I'd never even thought of in ways to process and think about. And the questions you asked were all the parts of the book that I highlighted and had questions about myself, because I thought, this is so good and I want to know more about this and where this came from. So beautifully done, Natasha. What an incredible journey. What an incredible story. What an incredible book you've written, and helped really just me personally to give voice to things that are still going on inside of me as well. So well done to the both of you.
And since Scott is sort of, alluding to this, for our listeners, okay, you can go to Amazon. You can find Natasha's book. It's in paperback, hardcover, ebook formats. And I encourage you, when you finish reading the book, Scott, it would be great if you would leave a review on Amazon and also on Goodreads. That would be helpful. So, Natasha, suppose somebody wants to contact you about your book, or just about their own grief journey. How would they do that?
Well, right now, as you know, Paul, we're still developing some things where hopefully we can just have even some different platforms to engage those conversations. Right now, one way is to go to my website. That's just natashadongell.com, and I'll receive emails through the website that way. And also, I'm on Facebook as Natasha Dongell and on Instagram as Natasha Dongell. So those should be easy places to find me and be able to message me.
Okay. Yeah, there is more coming. If you would like to have access to some additional materials, as well as Natasha just, talking about a little bit more kind of expanded information about the grief journey, but also like what she's doing now, that is coming. And so if you would give her your email, then you'll be on that list, and we'll get things going. Okay, so Natasha, do you have anything else that you would like to say in summary?
Oh, just that I'm so grateful for you guys, for just your friendship. It means so much to me. And I'm really grateful for just the support through both the journey as well as publishing the book. Yeah, it's very humbling, very honoring, and I'm really grateful. So I'm really grateful that the Lord allowed me to do this. And yeah, sometimes He entrusts us with weighty things. And I think that, and then it's important that we help sometimes, bear each other up when that happens. So that's a beautiful part of the body of Christ, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, and there is more to come from Natasha. There are definitely more books in her heart and mind. So that's coming. So thank you, Natasha. Thank you, kind listener. Until next time, whenever that may be, we look forward to joining you again on Moments That Matter. Thanks.